For centuries, Europe was a continent that was pretty much defined by war. It perfected the art of tearing itself apart. But then, out of the rubble of its absolute deadliest conflict, this radical idea popped up. What if we could bind nations so tightly together that war would become impossible? So today, we're going to dive into the incredible story of how that project, the European Union, was born, how it works today, and why its relationship with a global power like Brazil is actually more important than ever.
So here's our roadmap. First up, we'll dig into the legacy of conflicts that really made the EU a necessity. Then, we'll trace the creation of this, unique peace project. From there, we'll take a hard look at the intense pressures the Union is facing right now, before we connect all of that to a really crucial strategic partnership, the one it shares with Brazil.
To really get what the European Union is all about, you have to understand the problem it was designed to solve. And that problem was Europe's long, brutal, and seemingly endless history of turning on itself.
And that's really the core question, isn't it? This isn't just some academic thought experiment. This was a question that haunted generations who lived through unimaginable devastation. So how do you break a cycle that just seems completely unbreakable?
Now, what's so powerful about this slide is the rhythm you can see. The end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815 was supposed to bring lasting peace, but nope, it was shattered by these waves of revolutions like the Spring of the Peoples in 1848. Then came the industrial-scale slaughter of World War I, followed just 2 decades later by the even greater horror of World War II. It was just this relentless, tragic cycle of destruction.
So out of the ashes of that final, catastrophic war, a handful of visionaries came up with a solution that was just as radical as the problem was huge. They basically decided to rip up the old rulebook and rewrite the rules for the entire continent.
And this quote, this gets right to the heart of it. The Schuman Declaration in 1950 wasn't just about promises or treaties. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. Take the raw materials of war, coal and steel, the very things you need to build tanks and guns, and put them under a shared supranational authority. The logic was, if France and Germany couldn't control their own war industries by themselves, well, they literally couldn't go to war with each other. It was a simple yet absolutely revolutionary concept.
But this whole thing didn't just pop up overnight, not even close. It was a deliberate, step-by-step, brick-by-brick construction. It started small in 1951, with just coal and steel. Then the treaties of Rome in 57 expanded things to a common market. It actually wasn't until the Maastricht Treaty in 1992 that the political structure we know today as the European Union was formally created. It was the result of decades of patient, deliberate work.
So, how does this union actually, govern? It mainly uses 2 types of laws. Think of regulations as a single law for the whole club. Once it's passed in Brussels, it applies everywhere, right away. Directives, on the other hand, are a bit different. They set a common goal, let's say improve air quality, but they let each country figure out the best way to write its own laws to get there. It's this constant balancing act between unity and national independence.
Okay, but it's not all smooth sailing. This historic project for peace and unity is under some serious pressure right now. The EU is facing a mix of brand new crises and the return of some very old tensions that are testing its very foundations. The Brexit vote in 2016, that was a massive shock to the system. And what's so fascinating is that it wasn't a unified decision at all, even within the UK. The divisions ran deep. While England and Wales voted to leave, Scotland and Northern Ireland voted overwhelmingly to stay. That, of course, has reignited all kinds of debates about their own futures and really highlights the complex identities at play here.
Now, to understand another huge pressure point, we need to rewind a bit and talk about this concept, the Paz Armada, or armed peace. This was the situation in Europe right before World War I. So technically there was peace. No one was actively fighting, but it was only being held together because rival military alliances were armed to the teeth, creating this incredibly tense, precarious balance of terror.
So why does an old concept like that matter so much right now? Well, because from Moscow's perspective, NATO's expansion into former Soviet bloc countries after the Cold War is seen as a direct threat. And this perception has fueled a new era of confrontation, which all culminated in the war in Ukraine. It's brought back this dangerous dynamic that feels eerily similar to that armed peace from a century ago, where you have rival blocs once again in a state of extremely high tension.
With all these immense pressures, the EU really can't afford to just look inward. As a major global player, its success depends on having strong alliances. And that brings us to our final section, the Union's deep and strategic relationship with Brazil, a key partner in a pretty turbulent world.
This relationship didn't just happen overnight either. Formal ties go all the way back to 1960.
A really big step was the 1992 Framework Cooperation Agreement, which laid the groundwork for much closer collaboration. But the real game changer was in 2007. That's when the relationship was officially upgraded to a full strategic partnership, which recognized Brazil's growing power and basically put it on the same level as the EU's most important global allies.
So what does this partnership actually look like in terms of money and goods? Well, this table makes it super clear. Brazil's exports to the EU are mostly commodities, agricultural stuff like soy and coffee and raw materials like iron ore. And in return, the EU sends high-value manufactured goods, machinery, pharmaceuticals, and cars to Brazil. It's a classic example of a resource-driven economy partnering with a technology-driven one, a dynamic that really defines a lot of global trade today.
And it's not just about Brazil and the EU as one big thing. Brazil has to navigate this complex web of individual relationships with Europe's major powers. You've got Germany for industry, France for defense and tech, and the UK for finance. And, crucially, this also includes Russia, a fellow member of BRICS and a vital supplier of fertilizer, which just goes to show the delicate balancing act Brazil has to pull off in a world of shifting alliances.
Which brings us right back to where we started. The European Union was an audacious, almost unbelievable answer to a history of self-destruction. And let's be clear, it succeeded in creating the longest period of peace in Western European history. But now, facing internal fractures like Brexit and external conflicts that feel like echoes from its darkest chapters, the question is still there. Can this unprecedented peace project endure?